Okay, it's the top of the hour. This is Tracy Berardi, Program Manager of CISQ. Thanks for joining us today for a webinar, Quality in the Digital Age, the Role of System Integrators in the Software Supply Chain. Here with Dave Norton, Executive Director of CISQ, who's going to be presenting today. A few things, if you'd like a copy of the slides, there's a link in the chat box. You're welcome to download those for reference. Also in the handouts tab, we have a couple of documents. There's a set of artifacts, contract language, sample agreements, sample SLAs. There's also a document that talks about how to use standards for quality and sizing, productivity in your agreements, and also in reporting. So you're welcome to access those as well. And we should have some time at the end for questions, and you can enter your questions in the questions tab in the GoToWebinar toolbar. And following the event too, we're going to capture a video recording of the webinar, so that will also be posted to the CISQ website afterwards. So Dave has presenting control here, so why don't I hand it over to Dave to get started.
Thank you, Tracy. So good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the part of the world. So my name is Dave Norton. I'm the Executive Director for CISQ, and today we're looking at how really the changing role of system integrators and suppliers generally in terms of quality and the relationship in the software supply chain. Now, this is an issue that has come up in a number of situations that me and Tracy have been involved with. Most recently, we had our Cyber Resilience Summit in Washington, and we had individuals from U.S. government, U.S. Federal agencies, and one of the things that came up was how can an agency, how can not just government, but a bank or a healthcare work with their suppliers to ensure that the software is built to a basic level of quality? How can they work with their suppliers to make sure there are no vulnerabilities in that software? And we got talking about the issues of the supply chain. Now, not so much about securing the end-to-end supply chain itself, but making sure that the very beginning of the software supply chain is using the correct standards and building the right quality. And in most cases, that involves system integrators and outsourcing organizations who are part of, who continuously are part of that supply chain. And the other thing that's interesting is, as we're moving towards more of a product mindset, moving away from projects to more of a product mindset or a platform mindset, the changing language around quality. So it's not just the idea that we are delivering an initial system which has minimum vulnerabilities and high quality. It's also the idea of through life support and total cost of ownership, that system could be around for, will be around for many, many years. And suppliers now need to think about how can they deliver a system as a product? How can they work with their client throughout the life of that product? So moving away from that classic kind of project mindset, which is much more fixed on scope, schedule, and cost, and quality might be in there, to a mindset of continuous delivery of value and balancing the total cost of ownership, especially as suppliers now are using more agile and DevOps practices. So hopefully I'll just make sure you can see my slides. So if I move the slides forwards now. So this is not a new issue. This has been a problem for the industry for 40 years. But what has happened in the last 5 years is the issues, and we have seen within software have risen to the C level. And in preparing for this presentation, I came across 5 or 6 interesting case studies where the CEO was let go or put under pressure to resign, or has been, in a very kind of embarrassing situation because of the underlying outages within their organization, the system outages. So for the first time, we're starting to see more C-level discussion around the issues of software quality. Now, as quality engineers, as software engineers, this is not surprising. This is something that we've been speaking about for 40 years or plus. But finally, it's now getting recognition. Now, the good side is there are now people at a more senior level who are willing to listen in terms of what should we do. Increasingly, regulators are under pressure to be more proactive, and policymakers are now asking more questions and being more hands-on in terms of the policies they should be thinking about within the IT industry. I had a conversation recently with an individual who's in charge of policies in aerospace, and he mentioned that in aerospace, the policies are very well understood. The related standards are very well understood. You would not build an aircraft, for example, without using 178C standard. But he then asked the question, how comes if he gets an enterprise system built, there may not be any standards really involved at all in terms of quality, or if they are, they can be applied quite lackluster. So there's more attention. Now, the downside is if we don't act as an industry, if we don't get our own house in order, then there's a higher probability that the regulators will come under pressure to act. So I think we're at a stage in the industry that we need to clean up the systems. We need to focus on overall quality, especially as we're doing things with cyber physical, IoT, digital twins. And if we don't clean our own house up, I think eventually we will see greater regulation and standards and policies pushed onto us, as opposed to us leading and actually being actively involved and showing the way. So why is this so crucial? Because, well, as I said earlier, most systems in organizations are delivered by third parties. They're delivered by system integrators, consultancies, their package, or cloud. And there is a myth in some organizations that if you use a package or you use a cloud, you won't have these issues. Well, that's not true. A SaaS offering can be open to vulnerabilities as much as a system that is built by a third-party consultancy for you. They're not immune. In some ways, having a package or moving towards a package and SaaS mindset can actually make things worse, because it can then become a central target vector. It's public knowledge that most of the large SaaS providers are targeted by state and non-state actors, and because they are used by so many end enterprises, the stakes are very high. If you can hack a very large SaaS provider, you can have access to thousands of accounts. So don't fall into the myth that this doesn't apply if you use SaaS or packages. It still applies in terms of those underlying quality issues. And the effect is like dropping a stone into a pond. It ripples out. That vulnerabilities introduced early at source will affect all those lines of business systems, and can have a devastating effect in things like IoT. So I was chatting to an automotive supplier, and one of their major concerns was a vulnerability introduced at source would be in probably 30 to 40,000 IoT devices within less than 6 months. it would have a huge cascade effect. So their concern was making sure that not only the IoT devices they were putting into the automobile were fit for purpose, but also liability. They don't want to be in a situation of being liable for an accident or a hack or loss of finance or whatever it might be, because those systems had that vulnerability put in right at the very start of the development. The other thing is, again, our old friend, cost of ownership. One of the things we're already starting to find is many organizations, many large enterprises that are using cyber physical IoT are starting to report that yes, it's given them great benefits in terms of reaching their customers and innovating, but the cost of ownership is higher than they expected. And again, that's something we want to make sure that the system integrators, the consultancies, are working on to make sure that that is low as possible. So the other thing that happens is when things go wrong, you end up with angry citizens, angry customers. And as you know, as I showed with the slides with the CEOs publicly berated, you're now finding CEOs being pulled into parliaments to explain their IT systems, not the CIO, the CEO. And that then cascades down to the regulators. It was your job, Mr. Finance Regulator, to make sure Bank XYZ didn't have these sorts of problems, or your industry you regulate doesn't have these sorts of problems. What have you been doing? And then that starts to get recriminations in the boardroom where the blame game starts. Not just the CIO, which is the obvious one, but head of operations or finance or marketing are starting to find that they're under pressure to be, because of their role in the overall IT and increasingly digital strategy. So it rolls downhill. Once there's been an incident, an outage, bad press, obviously this chief information officer is one of the major targets, but not only the only target in this digital world in the boardroom. But then security. It was a cyber incident. What happened to our security? What happened to our security audits, or what happened in terms of making sure our suppliers were building security in from the get-go? And then it will come down to things like vendor management. What was vendor management doing? And then eventually it ends up quite often as being blamed by the SI. It's the SI, it was our third-party partners who have got this wrong. So interesting little figure for you. This year in the UK, there was a report published that said that cyber incidences had increased by 1,087% year on year. 21% of the incidents were reported as being directly related to third parties, and another 20% had highlighted that it was software delivered by a third party, but the enterprise owned had caused the issue. So 21%, they were outright blaming it was a issue with somebody else's software that affected us. Another 20%, it was another company that built the software for us that we've paid for, and that's caused the issue. So over 40% were effectively blaming SIs as being the reason why they had these incidents. So this is the thing we're seeing now. It's the blame game, and eventually the blame will stop at the door of the person who cannot speak up, or the organization that cannot push back. And quite often, as I've said already, that is the SIs who will end up having to shoulder that responsibility. So it might be the CEO who's publicly embarrassed and berated in the press, but when it comes to who should we, not have a contract with, it's going to be the supplier that provided that software is suddenly going to find they are frozen out. There's going to be renegotiations of the contract, or they're just going to be cut out completely from working with that organization. And this gets onto some of the quite scary figures that we're seeing. Over 60% of contracts are renegotiated, 1/3 cancelled outright. The other thing that we're seeing is insourcing coming along now, where organizations, for various reasons, I mean, agile and DevOps is one reason I've seen, it's been brought back into the enterprise. I've had numerous conversations with organizations where they've said digital has been a catalyst to bring the work back, because the argument is digital needs a closer relationship with the customers. They've had issues with quality with third parties before. Now is the time to bring some of that work back in. And what we tend to find is the work that gets brought back in is the work that is closer to digital. It's the work that is really about innovation. So the risk is the SIs are left with the legacy systems, the systems of record, and don't really get to work with the enterprises about those true digital innovation, those business change systems. The other issue we're finding obviously is SIs under pressure because of issues with, moving towards SaaS and the rise in interest in moving off the legacy systems to a SaaS model. So we're arguing it doesn't have to be this way. We're arguing that outsourcers, system integrators do not have to be at the mercy of the business and the enterprises. They can become more proactive in the digital agenda, in the transformation, and actually show the enterprises, potential clients and current clients, that they are a safe pair of hands to deliver those systems. Now, this needs leadership. It needs more than just saying we use, quality standards. It needs leadership from the SI to say the reason why we use these standards is because of the impact they have on digital. The reason why we developed using this approach is because it lowers your vulnerability and it lowers your total cost of ownership. So it's not only the practical side, there's an education side. And I think there is a serious need now for SIs to be more vocal with regulators, with certification bodies, with auditors, to show they are taking a leadership role, to show they are a bit more proactive. Otherwise, as I said earlier, we will find that eventually the issues with outages and cyber incidents, then governments and policymakers will be forced to move, and we will find enterprises and their SI partners having policies and regulation forced on them. So I think now is the time to be more proactive if we don't want to live in a world where we're not actually in charge of that world, so to speak, in terms of the regulations that we work to. So we need to be more reactive. At the moment, most organizations are reacting to incidents and outages. They're not being proactive in looking for where the issues are. So for example, if you speak to most organizations, and actually this was something when I was a Gartner analyst we used to do as a little bit of a test in terms of application portfolios, we would ask them, when was the last time they really understood the complexity of that application portfolio? And many organizations, I would probably say about 2/3, would say it was Y2K. The last time they really understood what they had, how it related to the business, how it related to each other, and importantly, where the technical and architectural debt was within that system, it was Y2K, 19 years ago now. Many organizations will revisit the portfolio in terms of complexity when there is an issue, but that's being reactive. So we're saying to the industry what needs to happen is we need to look at the complexity of the systems and the portfolio of those systems. And we need to work with our partners to make sure that we are reducing the technical and architectural debt of our current systems, and importantly, not introducing new technical and architectural debt in our new systems. So we've got to build from a solid foundation, and that foundation is best practices in the form of standards. Now that's what standards are. You know, standards are best practices that we can apply to the systems we're developing. Now recently we had a discussion about standards versus standardization, and the discussion was, we do not want to have an enterprise where our suppliers are so standardized we stifle innovation. We don't actually have that variation that actually generates new insight, new innovation. Now this was an organization that was doing a lot of design thinking. They were using Agile and DevOps with their partners. So we need to be very careful. There was a big difference between saying we will use standards in the tool chain and in terms of quality versus every single Agile team or DevOps team will work in exactly the same way, and we will try and remove any variation, because you can only remove variation in areas where the process is very, very linear. So in areas where there isn't non-linear effects, where areas where there's low complexity. And we know with digital, we're not in that space. Digital has a lot of non-linear effects. There's a lot of complexity involved in the digital enterprise. So I just wanted to make sure that people understand that the use of standards does not necessarily mean that you end up with your SI having every Agile and DevOps team you standardized, because they won't be. I can use standards to make sure that I'm not introducing technical debt and still have a big variation in the actual teams in terms of what they're doing and how they're doing things. The other thing that I think is important is recognizing the language of quality has been very focused in the industry on projects, and now we're moving towards products. We need to revisit that language of quality to start thinking about through life support and the impact of event-driven API microservices. Now that has given great flexibility, but there is a serious issue in organizations that if that organization does not govern the APIs and microservices correctly, they can suffer from something called punctuated growth. Punctuated growth is a sharp rise in complexity, non-linear, that can happen very, very quickly. And if your supplier has been providing APIs that have low quality or vulnerabilities, then that punctuated growth complexity can lead to serious outages or a sharp rise in enterprise OPEX costs, and it can do so in a matter of months. So event-driven API gives us great flexibility, but in some ways it also complicates the quality question. And I've mentioned before about DevOps and DevSecOps. We should be thinking about quality in the DevOps toolchain. Interestingly enough, if you talk to the Agile and DevOps community, and I'm part of that community, we talk about test-driven development all the time. But we are currently doing a survey around software quality, static and dynamic analysis. And one of the interesting things we've already found from that survey is over half the people surveyed do not take the same view as they do with test-driven development, that it needs to be automated and part of the tool chain. When it comes to things like efficiency, maintainability, interoperability, and technical debt, over half the people we spoke to say, well, the developers should be able to build systems and have the skills not to cause those issues. Well, I'll give you one example. If you look at the common weakness enumerator that comes from MITRE and is built into CISQ standards, there are over 800, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy, I think there might even be over 1,000 now.
Yeah, there was something like 826, but I did hear they just added a whole bunch.
So somewhere between 800 to 1,000. who can remember all of those weaknesses? Nobody, to be honest. Nobody can remember all those weaknesses every day. But we have these people that say, but I expect my team to build quality in without having, the tools or the standards that look at technical debt or look at efficiency and maintainability. The other thing we find is quite often, if they do use a tool, it's used reactively when there has been an issue. So we hear people say, oh yes, we have SonarQube built into a tool chain. But actually, it's not really built into the tool chain because it's not run like continuous integration and test-driven development. It's not push button. It's not highly automated. And quite often, we'll find that the developers and the teams will reject the results from the tool anyway. So we need to think about how we can get the standards, and we can use standards related to software quality in a way that doesn't get in the way of the teams. And this is where things like security, reliability, performance, maintainability, we've taken those at the Consortium for Information Software Quality and translated those into a standard that can then be automated. So it really can be part of the DevSecOps tool chain. It really can be something that can be run more continuously, proactively, versus we've got an issue, let's have a look to see where the technical debt is. So why should we do this as an SI? What's the selling point here? Well, you can then work with your enterprise and your prospects, and you can talk about lowering the total cost of ownership and the rework. So if you look at most organizations, a typical system today will spend somewhere around 8% to 16% on CapEx. The remainder is OpEx. And a large part of that OpEx is rework or refactoring. So if the system is delivered with high quality from the get-go, we're reducing the amount of rework. The other thing that we're finding now is, because more organizations are having to look for indemnity and coming under audit insight, we're finding enterprises are asking how can they deliver a system that makes it easier to audit, actually lowers those insurance costs. And it's interesting at CISQ now we're starting to get more inquiries from audit organizations. Now, forgive me for this language, but audit organizations can be a little bit like ambulance chasers in lawyers. They are looking for revenue streams. And many organizations in the audit world are starting to recognize that software quality and vulnerability is a very lucrative revenue stream. So some of the questions we've been getting are basically, is there a business model here that we can leverage beyond the standard work we're doing now in terms of auditing companies? Can we be working with certification agencies to say, right, we're going to look at that particular software from that supplier, and we're going to look to see that it has a low level of vulnerability. We're going to look to see that it has high maintainability. So the audit companies, as any organization would, are looking to spread their capabilities, offer new services, and this is one of the areas they're starting to latch on. We can increase velocity, we can reduce lead time without sacrificing quality or introducing risk. Reducing the overall technical debt. I've mentioned this before, that it's not just about the individual applications, but it's about the portfolio piece as well. So, I've spoken to organizations, not many, but the organizations I would say are doing this right, where they're using our standards or others, and then they might be using SonarQube or CAR software in the tool chain and across the portfolio. The other thing that's important is, if you're delivering systems that have lower technical debt and lower architectural debt, you can actually maintain more systems with the same headcount. So to put that into figures, if we look at function points, there are organizations where the number of FTEs, now I'm actually looking at the SIs here, the number of full-time from the SI side, maintaining the number of function points could be as low as 700 or 800. So effectively, they are having, one individual for 700 or 800 function points they are looking after for their client. But organizations that have done technical debt reduction strategies, SIs who have made sure that the systems they've built for their partners have low technical debt, are in the figures of 2,000 to 3,000 function points per FTE that they can maintain. Now that means you can maintain a much larger portfolio for the same headcount, which means you have a bigger margin. So how does this actually work? So what we're finding is organizations have to build this trust relationship with the SIs, and they have to start with the request for proposals, actually building in the RFP process itself, requirements around software quality and vulnerability, asking questions. How are you going to ensure, Mr. SI, that you deliver a system to me that has low total cost of ownership, that doesn't have vulnerabilities? So we can see the language of RFPs start to change as people start to introduce the language of quality and product quality into the RFP process. So here's one example. So this is from the US government, and this example here shows where they are citing CISQ standards and saying, if you want to work with us, you need to have these standards or equivalent. So now you've found that partner. You've now got to start to say, okay, moving beyond the RFP, actually into statements of work now. So in the statements of work, you can put the language around software quality. Now, this actually is an example from a document that Tracy has made available for the people on the webinar today. This actually is about more around productivity and using a standard productivity measurement approach within the statements of work. But there are similar examples where they have clauses around the level of technical debt that's acceptable, the maintainability index, the minimum maintainability index acceptable, and clauses on the statement of work of the reliability and vulnerability that they think is necessary. Now, you could argue, David, isn't this all non-functional requirements? Well, yes, to a degree. But the big difference is in the product's digital world, those non-functional requirements have become far more important. If you look at your mobile device, one of the main reasons people will delete an app from their mobile device is performance. And that used to be a non-functional requirement. It's put on the backlog and quite often forgotten about. Now it's critical. So more and more organizations are saying, no, it needs to be given the same billing as functional requirements, and even going further and baking it into the contracts and statements of work. So this is based on CISQ 19515 standard for productivity measurement, but there are similar CISQ standards that are on the OMG site for quality. So now we've got statements of work that have asked for a certain level of quality and also certain levels of productivity. We're actually into the SI themselves. So we want to make sure that the teams are using the right sorts of standards and the right sorts of tools day in, day out. Now, one of the things that we found is, and actually I had this when I was working in India, one of the things as auditing companies or my on behalf of DHL, I would find teams where they had identified high levels of technical and architectural debt, but the product manager or the relationship partner with the client did not want to spend too much time on refactoring, because the feeling was refactoring sounds like rework's a bad thing. We don't want to be showing we're doing lots of rework because we might, concern the client that we're building bad code. Another reason is some organizations, if they see refactoring and rework, they actually bill that differently. So I've worked with an organization that at the end of each sprint, you had to provide how much refactoring was done in that sprint, and that refactoring could not be charged. So that was a fixed price contract that was written in such a way that it really hurt the SI. Not surprisingly, what happened? No refactoring and high levels of technical debt. So I want people to realize that quite often the teams know what to do. They know what to do correctly, and they want to do the right thing. It's actually the relationship at a contract level that could be driving poor behavior. So we need to have visible dashboards. I mean, this dashboard here gives insight into how much productivity, how many function points a particular team has delivered. And that's important, because if you want to be able to show that you're reducing technical debt, if you want to be able to show that you have a lower cost of maintenance, you need a common datum. Now, if we look at Enterprise Agile is struggling with this because of the use of story points. So increasingly, and this is actually when I was at Gartner, this question came up probably 2 or 3 times a week. What do we do about having a common datum with our system integrators in the Enterprise Agile world? What's happening is people are fudging the metrics. So one fudge is 4 hours of coding, 4 hours of testing equals 1 story point. Well, technically, that equals 1 ideal day, and it can be gamed very easily. So there's now increasing interest in function points and automatic function point counting as well, which is behind the scenes. It doesn't get in the way of the developer. Now, I've always had a love-hate relationship with function points. I did my master's project in function point counting in real-time systems 20 odd years ago. But I'm beginning to recognize that the Agile community is reinventing the wheel. And I think we're going to find ourselves back at some sort of functional size measurement quite soon in the Enterprise Agile community. And I think this is one of the advantages as well. If I can use story points subjectively within a team, so each team is still free to use story points for looking at their backlog, helping them size the backlog and estimate. But behind the scenes, there is a objective standard-based measure that can be collected automatically on the amount of software actually delivered. Then I think that's the best of both worlds. You have the flexibility that Agile wanted in wideband Delphi estimation and sizing, but you've got consistency to the client in terms of what you've actually delivered, the productivity levels of that, and then back to the quality metrics against a certified level of function points. So now we are improving our delivery. We have clear dashboards on what we're delivering. We understand how much we're delivering, and we're actually starting to build quality in. The final thing is to make sure those dashboards are visible to the enterprise, to your client. And this is one of the things that I'm starting to see more interest in, where people are saying, if we are working with a supplier that has the dashboard at the individual product level and also across the portfolio level, we should have access to that. And this, I think, can be a selling point. I think coming to the market and saying, we are a safe pair of hands to deliver your digital transformation. And we are so confident of our engineering abilities, we will provide to you these sorts of dashboards so you can see how we are making sure that the systems and products have high maintainability. They're not going to cost you an arm and a leg. You can see they're not going to cost you issues or to give you issues in terms of performance and reliability. And I think this, for me, is a bit of a litmus test. When I was more active in sourcing in terms of choosing partners, I tended to find those partners who were very proud of their engineering teams and were more than willing to share this information. But for every one of them, I probably find 4 or 5 who really did not want to go open commode with this information, because this is shining a very bright light in dark places. And if a provider doesn't have the right level of quality, they don't have the right level of senior engineers or the right tools, then they're going to be reluctant to show this information. So now we've got that end-to-end process. Now, I've spoken in terms of what the enterprise should do here, but if you reverse this, think about this as an opportunity to educate the market. Think about this as an opportunity to work with prospects, to take them through this journey and show how you tick all these boxes, to show them that you are being proactive in terms of software quality in the supply chain. The other thing is being proactive and having a standards-based approach protects you. If we think about that slide which showed all the issues rolling downhill, well, this is your suit of armor. This is when somebody in an enterprise says, I'm sorry, we are on CNN or BBC because of this outage. It was the quality of our partner XYZ. Well, it's harder for them to use that excuse when that partner has been delivering against a set of consistent and public standards, has very clear dashboards, and can show that actually they haven't been adding vulnerabilities in. They haven't been delivering systems that have low maintainability, which are with issues of outages. So this protects you. This approach is a nice way of protecting yourself in a way that is not pushing risk back to the client. It's saying we're happy to work with your digital agenda. We're happy to work on more complex systems. We're going to take this standard-based approach. We're going to take a highly automated approach. So you understand, Mr. Client, that if there's an issue, it's more likely to be on your side now than ours. So we're being fair, we're being open, and we're actually getting our clients to be more proactive themselves to get their own house in order. So by engaging with us as a standards body, you can be part of this journey. We are seeing greater demand for a new generation of digital standards for the digital era, because I think many of the standards that are currently there are not fit for purpose, especially in terms of things like automation and DevSecOps. You know, we are a non-profit organization, so the slides, the information that we provided today, you can use that freely. It helps you demonstrate leadership. It helps you demonstrate leadership with your prospects and current customers, that you can talk about what you're doing proactively. And I think that last bullet point here, influencing policymakers and regulators, I think is really important. I think, you know, if we don't do that, then we will find at some point, not immediately, but I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we will come under increasing scrutiny. And much of that, as we all know, with policymakers and regulators, is not always right. If you look at the utility industry, for example, when that went through greater scrutiny about 15, 18 years ago, a lot of the regulations and policies that were pushed onto the utility organizations caused serious problems, especially around in terms of things like tariff. And it took 4 or 5 years to get it right. We want to avoid that, I think, and the best way of avoiding that is showing that we're getting our own house in order. Why work with CISQ? Well, the other reason is, in terms of standards, we're quite agile. Most standards take 3 to 5 years. We can actually get standards through less than 2 years, sometimes less than 15 months. And we've got a number of new standards we're working on at the moment. around software quality in terms of model-based systems engineering. We're doing updating our standards around technical debt. We have a new working group that's looking at automated sizing from the backlog. So things like Cosmic, IFPUG, what other sizing methods, lots of other sizing methods out there. We're looking at an agnostic approach to sizing from the backlog early in architecture and design. And the other thing is we listen to the community. When the community identifies an area that we think is ripe for a standard that can be automated and part of the tool chain and part of the end-to-end system engineering process, we are quite willing to start thinking about how we can actually produce a standard for that. So I'm going to stop there, and I apologize for a bit of the marketing at the end, but we are a standards group, and it's important that people understand that we exist and those standards are out there. We will open this up for any questions.
Great. Yeah, so again, if you'd like to ask any questions, there's the questions box in the toolbar. And I'll add, when Dave was talking about our current projects, there's one more too that we're really excited about. We're working on a software bill of materials, or SBOM for short, SBOM initiative as well. And there's an open call for participation on some of our new projects. So, and we'd like to thank our current CISQ member sponsors from Cognizant, Tech Mahindra, CGI, for providing a lot of these insights and thought leadership as well. And we're very open here. It's a great place to collaborate on these standards and their deployment. So, but actually, look, Dave, it's pretty quiet in the questions box.
Can people can we take them off mute so they can ask questions just directly if they wanted to?
Let's see. It looks like actually a lot of them are self-muted.
Let's have a look.
Let's see.
So if there are any questions, okay, everybody is now unmuted.
There you go.
Yeah. So if there are questions and you don't want to put it in the chat box, you just want to ask it, please feel free to do so. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, thank you for attending. There is going to be a follow-up presentation that's going to focus more on the audit issues, and a lot of that's going to be based on the work that me and Tracy have done recently, and what happened at the Cyber Resilience Summit, which I think was very interesting in terms of where the audit and policy makers are going with the digital agenda and issues with quality. So there will be a follow-up webinar there. Please download the documents that Tracy's provided to you, or come along to the website. We have more documents, and if you think of any questions in the future, please let us know.
Sounds great, and thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.